pointless, Mr. President.
Nothing is pointless. And the reason is because I'm the President of the great United States of America. Yeah!
Metal Wolf Chaos XD is a re-release of Metal Wolf Chaos, a third-person action mech game created by FromSoftware. Yes, before FromSoft were making the same game over and over and over, they were making the same game but with mechs, over and over and over. Originally released exclusively for the original Xbox, which is already a nail in the coffin for availability. Add to the fact that this game never got released outside of Japan, where the Xbox sold only 5 units, and you have a really rare game indeed. Looking on eBay for prices, you'll audibly wince at how much it costs. Still, in my opinion, this is a necessary evil. Sure, no one with any sense is going to spend hundreds on one game, but I would rather have a super expensive physical game than a cheap digital game that will eventually get pulled from online markets. I mean, that's the way things are going now. Just this month, DuckTales Remastered was taken off digital platforms. Didn't get it? Too bad, it's lost to the ether, along with games like Scott Pilgrim and all of Telltale's catalogue. One of those games a favourite of yours? Too bad, you can't play them anymore. Just be grateful you had the privilege to pay for them and enjoy them while you could. You entitled swine. Yep, nothing in this world is forever, and it seems digital media has less of a shelf life than a can of Spam. Where was I going with this? So Metal Wolf Chaos is expensive. Now, over in Japan, they are a bit of a funny bunch, as they occasionally try to appeal to a Western market with a breakout game, but because they have no idea how to do that, they typically make something that appears more foreign than a traditional Japanese game. It falls into a category of Uncanny Valley in a way. I want to come up with a new genre for these types of games, as there are quite a few. Stuff like Binary Domain, Lollipop Chainsaw, House of the Dead Overkill, Vanquish maybe, and even Metal Gear Solid to an extent. But that category is what Metal Wolf Chaos falls into, even if it wasn't From Software's intentions, as the game did not have a single audience in mind. So before From Software's breakout hit with Swords and Dragons that made them a household name came out, they were much more into sci-fi with their Armored Core series, a franchise with high-paced mech action and overdramatic story. But to try to tap into the Western market, they decided to release a new game on the fancy new Western-made video game console, the Xbox. So they made a game with high-paced mech action and an overdramatic story, but set in America. I don't really see why this plan would work. And I guess we never will, as the game was only ever released in Japan, even though the game had a full English voiceover developed for a Western system with input from a Western studio. And so the Western release was cancelled following the political climate of the September the 11th attacks. Even though the game released in 2004, I don't know how quick time is as a healing agent, and the Manhattan level probably didn't help much. Still, I don't see why a Europe release wasn't on the table. And that's where this story would end, as a cult classic that no one has ever really played, where only a few hardcore Gamer Fuel gamers could ever lord over how good their Japanese-only mech game is on their Japanese Xbox, while they squint their eyes trying to decipher the characters on their blurry CRT. That's what would have happened if it had not been for the absolute heroes over at Devolver Digital, who announced at E3 that Metal Wolf Chaos would be coming westward finally after 8 years. So how is it? It's a mixed bag. So things are looking pretty bad in America, and as the president is addressing his fellow Hamburgers, his office becomes under attack by a military force made up of the United States' own army. So the only reasonable response from the most powerful man in the world is to prove that title, and he busts out a mech suit and begins blasting away, finding his way to Air Force One, which is underground for some reason. As he takes off, he recognizes, somehow, another mech as his vice president, Richard. Now the president retreats to the west coast and must begin the bloodiest campaign tour of all time, as he fights back the coup's forces, rescuing musicians and causing so much property damage you'd double take if it was worth it. I'm pretty sure a lot of Galaxy Brain reviewers will be drooling at the mouth about how much Metal Wolf Chaos predicted about current day America. Maybe the marketing, which is all these people react to, didn't help with its Mech America Great Again line, but this is America as seen through the eyes of the Japanese, which is quite flattering considering what happened. It's all about being loud, blowing stuff up, and saying freedom as often as possible. Don't make that a drinking game, you won't last. The characters are obviously the biggest bullet point on the back of the box. For those who have played the game or watched it on YouTube, they will often talk about the cutscenes and how great they are, and while I generally agree, I really only ever found the cutscenes with Richard to be the ones that are any good. This guy absolutely chews the scenery, doing more damage than your explosions ever could, and he 100% makes the game, where everyone else is really bad and often not in a good way. Tone and inflections are off and don't make any sense of the situation. It's kinda like House of the Dead 2. But that game got away with it, as it was only one line in between every level of zombie shooting. Here, characters talk often and in between every mission, and Michael, our main character, is so hard to pin down. I don't know what this character's personality is. At one point he's cracking jokes and one-liners, like Dante, but the other he just sounds bored. And of course whenever he sees Richard, he has no choice but to scream his name every single time they meet. I think I made it clear how much I like the art style and aesthetics from games from this generation, but I am super happy with the port work that's been done in upscaling this game. It is high resolution and frame rate presented in widescreen, and you can even play in borderless windowed mode. I know this stuff should come as standard and I shouldn't be surprised by this, but considering how bad some re-releases are, I count my lucky stars every single time. And while emulation on a powerful computer is nice and can provide the same effect, there are some mixed results. And this is it! This is the version of the game we'll be remembered for, so you gotta nail it the first time. In your mech suit, you can have 2 guns equipped at any time, and can fire them individually via the 2 triggers. You can swap weapons individually and on the fly by opening your backpack, and I love this idea. Look at all that Second Amendment! It might be a bit too much actually, as in the heat of combat, switching quickly can be a little tricky. You can remove guns from your loadout to make switching more manageable, but taking away a precious gun is the most un-American thing in this game. Now, while it is cathartic to run around with 2 bazookas and plow through buildings, that is definitely sub-optimal play. So from now on, I would like to give you some tips to play, because the game comes with no tutorial, so let me help you out. Don't be like me and find out there's a special all-out attack halfway through the game. So your guns do the aiming for you, making it possible to hit fast-moving targets that are spread out, such as missiles flying towards you. But I encountered a couple of auto-aiming problems where I would want to fire at an object right in front of me, but the game insists on shooting something off to the side. That can be pretty frustrating when you need to be blowing up, say, the cannons on a giant tank that's shooting the Statue of Liberty, just as an example. Your mech is also equipped with a thruster system, and at first I was a little confused by it. For the longest time I didn't realise that boosting on the ground was the fastest mode of transport. I have no idea why, that's my fault. So I was just in the air tapping the boost button to give me a little bit of extra speed, like Link's front rolls. As just holding boost in the air not only drains a huge portion of your boost meter quickly, it's also not that fast. You can boost in any direction, giving you free movement, and tapping it will allow you a small dodge. Its movement is actually similar to Vanquish, zooming around and firing guns at enemies. Some guns use your boost meter to fire energy-based weapons, so keep that in mind if you're flying over, say, something like water. One thing I do like is while the boost meter is small and can't be upgraded, you can tap into your own health to boost even longer. I love this, but it doesn't go far enough. It only allows you to drain 1 bar of health, because I prefer to cause as much self-harm to myself as possible. The levels themselves are a bit of a mixed bag. There are some standout sections within the large levels you fly around in, like with Times Square and all the posters and signs that I would love to sit and read, but there is a giant spider mech blasting me with railguns, to Las Vegas, where I can smash through a bunch of slot machines. But the majority of levels are generic grey buildings that eventually they all look the same. There are still some cool levels, like the Wild West themed town, but I would like to have seen more landmarks of American cities. Like, the Fonzie statue, a big wheel of cheese. Oh, Mount Rushmore! Mount Rushmore! Anyway, that stuff doesn't really work if the levels all have the same objectives, so no level has its own identity. And the objective is always blow up a group of towers and then move on to the next batch. In this game, about frantically switching between weapons and boosting all over, the main objective always boils down to stand in one spot with grenade launchers equipped and keep the buttons held down until it goes away. There are some levels with different gimmicks, like a rising poison level or a rail cannon charging, but again, to stop these effects, you go around blowing up towers. Other side objectives for missions include freeing hostages, but be careful how you do it, and finding energy cells to increase your health, and you really have to scour the level to pick these up. After you beat a stage, you are given a rating and your funds for your campaign. Now it's time to go to R&D. You can now use resources to research new weapons or manufacture ones you have researched. Researching is how you go about unlocking new weapons, and you'll be pumping money into this if you want all weapons. Now usually I would recommend you experiment with as many weapons as possible. I mean, that's what happened with me. I was pretty disappointed that machine guns were just these little SMGs, but after spending enough, I got my Gatling guns and started ripping through the enlisted men and women of the US military. But there are a few roadblock sections in this game when it comes to the bosses, and you really want the most powerful weapons you can get. So try to ignore stuff like the flamethrower, the rail guns. Just get bazookas and miniguns and you'll be okay. Just like real life, parts and labour are two separate charges, so even after you've researched the guns, you then have to pay for them. At least there's not, like, a delivery time, so that's one thing. Now let me talk about the bosses. So it's pretty obvious that Metal Gear Solid was an inspiration, even so much that the name is mimicked. We got Metal and Metal, easy correlation there. Wolf and Gear have the same number of letters, and Solid and Chaos are two states of matter. But that's just a game theory. And so because of this link, the bosses will usually have a conversation with Michael before the fight. There are some unnamed bosses, but most will talk about Rich's past life in the military that is only brought up in these fights. And I guess I need to give credit to Kojima for being able to create likable bosses on the first encounter, because it doesn't work here. Looking back on it, the bosses themselves are so weird because they are so inconsistent. Usually I'm able to just rip right through them, but other times I'm the one getting shredded. The difficulty curve is all over the place. The second to last level, the game sends two previous bosses at you, but I just sneeze on them and they die. But a few levels before that, I was cowering behind buildings as a hail of bullets were coming my way. I know you're supposed to gain better weapons later in the game, but it shouldn't cause this much of a damage difference. And there are a few roadblocks where I suppose the game is expecting you to go back to the previous missions and grind for money and materials, but if there's one thing I am, it is stubborn, and I refuse to play by the rules in an action game. Even if it means smashing my head against this brick wall takes longer than grinding anyway. But I hate that about action games where they expect you to grind because it doesn't make any sense. My progression through the game should be determined by my skill, not by the weapons I have. There are some cool boss situations, like the shootout in the Old West Town or the Manhattan level, where a giant spider mech chases you around the city, and the only way to make it vulnerable is to blow up the objectives, of course. But the bosses cause the biggest amount of frustration for me, especially the last one that just fires hundreds of missiles at you until you die. And just as a warning, there are no in-game checkpoints. You die, it's back to the start of the level. And I just have to quickly touch upon how unstable this game is. I had many crashes during my time playing, one of which was when I had defeated a boss that took me a good while to beat, and then I had to do it again! Upon completing the game, you are given two extra difficulty options, Fever and Hell. Fever lets you play through levels with unlimited ammo, whereas Hell bumps the difficulty up. Beating a stage on either difficulty will give you a jokey kind of weapon or another paint job for your mech. Which is a really tempting way for me to replay your game. And if you want to get all your collectibles such as the hostages and energy cells, the new difficulty options will make it go a lot smoother. So I commend the replayability, and after I've cooled off I will probably go back with a guide or something to pick up the collectibles I missed. When I got to this part of the script, I was actually thinking really hard about if I should recommend this game, and if it was worth bringing it Westside at all. I do think the game is definitely overhyped by the select few who have played it, and the allure of playing a hard-to-acquire game is why it's been so heavily demanded. But I don't think this game lives up to the hype at all. As a mech game, it's pretty standard fare, and has been outdone even at the time. And its over-the-top Americana story doesn't get as over-the-top as it could, save for a few isolated moments. But if you live in a vacuum, which I know is hard to do, we don't see fast-paced mech games anymore, as many are trying to be slow, plodding, realistic affairs. Sure, there's Daemon X Machina, but that is the exception these days. And I am all for making a hard-to-find game more readily available. I think the people who bought this game previously at inflated prices are the ones who will appreciate this game the most, with its high-resolution graphics, advanced options, and oh my god, a pre-order skin! And those ones who pretend to like this game because they spent hundreds of dollars on it can now finally understand the menus at least.